What's up, designers, and welcome back to Rempton Games. Today we're going to be looking at the best tips, tricks, and strategies for one of the most popular gateway games around, Ticket to Ride. I've divided these tips into four main categories: planning your routes, placing your trains, controlling information, and alternative strategies. Without further ado, let's just jump into it. The first big decision that players have to make at the beginning of the game is deciding which tickets to keep from the three that they're dealt at the beginning of the game. To maximize the points you get from these tickets, you should start by looking for one of the long routes that goes from coast to coast, such as LA to New York or Portland to Nashville. In addition to being worth a lot of points, these longer tickets allow you to control more area on the board, make it easier to connect smaller tickets along the way, and give you a better chance of earning the longest route bonus card. If you have one of these long tickets, then you should try to look for shorter tickets that might share some of the same routes along the way. This way you have to complete fewer routes to actually earn all your tickets. For example, if your main route is LA to New York, it might be pretty easy to pick up Denver to Pittsburgh along the way. If you don't have one of these longer coast-to-coast routes, you might be able to combine multiple shorter routes in order to kind of simulate it. For example, you could combine a ticket from Chicago to Santa Fe with another one from Santa Fe to Vancouver. The most important thing is not to look at each ticket individually, but to see how all of your tickets together can make a cohesive strategy. If your third ticket works well with your first two, then by all means keep it. However, if it seems like it's going to be too much work, it's in a totally different part of the board, or it just doesn't share any routes, then you might want to get rid of it. Of course, these initial tickets aren't the only ones you'll be completing throughout the game. You'll probably want to wait a few turns before drawing additional tickets though, just to get a good idea of where the choke points are, which areas of the board are more crowded than others, things like that. You might be able to see that the New England area of the board is getting a bit crowded and take a ticket in the southwestern region instead, for example. You may also want to draw new tickets towards the end of the game once you've completed your major routes. If you've already established good horizontal control over the board, then it's likely that at least one of the tickets you draw will already be pretty close to completion and can be easily finished. And hey, if you happen to draw a route that's already completely done, well, that's just free points. Now that we have our tickets and know our general game plan, it's time to start placing trains, right? Well, maybe. Depending on which tickets you've picked up, it's possible that there are in fact routes that you want to capture right away. The earliest routes you should build are those that are vital for your ticket and are easily blocked. One great example is Houston to New Orleans. This is only 2 trains long, and it's a gray route, which means trains of any color can be played on it. This combination makes it incredibly easy for another player to take the route and block you if you need it. Because it's on the coast, there are limited alternate ways to get around it. The shortest detour requires 3 routes and a total of 6 trains, and most of those are also easily blocked. Therefore, it's very important to grab this route early if you need it to complete a ticket, or if you want to block one of your opponents from completing theirs. Also keep in mind that the number of players at the table can help determine which routes are the most valuable. For example, some cities have multiple routes between them, but in a 2-player game only one of them is allowed to be used. This can make routes like Seattle to Portland or Dallas to Houston much more important to control in a 2-player game. On the other hand, more players means a more crowded board in general, which might mean more competition for the same routes. Some more potential choke points that can be important to pick up early include LA to Vegas, Nashville to Atlanta, and Seattle to Vancouver. Once those early vital routes have been claimed, however, you'll actually want to take a few turns before placing any more routes. Taking some time to collect trains will allow you to place your routes more efficiently and make it easier to collect longer routes. Picking longer routes is key because you get a lot more bang for your buck. A single long route can typically cover the same distance as 2 or even 3 short routes, which reduces the number of turns it takes for you to complete your tickets. In addition, the number of points you earn per train goes up as the routes get longer. If you use 6 trains to complete 3 2-train routes, you'll only earn a total of 6 points. On the other hand, If you complete a single 6-train route, you would earn 15 points instead. That's 2.5 times as many points with the same number of trains. Another benefit of waiting to collect a bunch of trains before placing your routes is that you can place multiple routes in consecutive turns. This means that even if your opponents are able to figure out where you're trying to build, they won't really have the time to react and stop you. If you instead built routes one at a time with turns in between, your opponents have more opportunity to try to block where you're trying to go. The final tip for placing your trains is not to build a linear path from beginning to end. This makes it too easy for your opponents to block where you're trying to go, and makes it more difficult for you to change plans if you have to make a detour. You also don't want to build in Morse code, with dots and dashes that have obvious gaps that your opponents can easily block. Probably the most flexible way to build is to start somewhere in the middle of your route and build outwards in both directions simultaneously. This makes you more flexible if you have to change your plan as you're going, and it makes it harder to block you because your opponents don't know where your endpoints are or which route you might want to take next. You may have noticed that the last few tips for placing your trains had to do with keeping your opponents guessing and not giving away your plans. This is because Ticket to Ride is all about controlling information. You want to try to figure out what your opponents are going to do without giving away your own plans. When it comes to gathering information from your opponents, there's lots of little things to pay attention to. Which cards are they pulling from the face-up trains? What areas of the board are they looking at? And how are they reacting when opponents build in different parts of the board? All of these things can be little clues that tell you where they might be trying to go next and can allow you to either thwart their plans or adjust your own in response. Just remember, if a particular action that your opponent does is giving you a clue, then that means you might be giving away information to your opponents if you do that same action. So be careful. One simple way to hide your own intentions is by drawing face-down cards from the deck rather than from the face-up cards. If you draw a face-up card, that gives your opponents additional information about which routes you might be trying to build, and it's less efficient because you can't get 2 wild cards. Sure, you might not be getting exactly the trains that you need at any given time, but if you're waiting to collect a bunch of trains so you can build multiple routes in a row, then it kind of evens out. Another option is to try and intentionally throw your opponents off the scent by choosing a city or route that you don't actually need and pretending like it's important. Spend some time looking around that area of the board and maybe sigh if an opponent builds an important route that connects to that city. Don't be too obvious about it, but make sure to tip your hand just enough that it's noticeable if your opponents are paying attention. Then you can flip the script on them by building in a completely different part of the board. 2 more vital pieces of information to keep an eye on are each player's score and how many trains everybody has left. You don't want to be caught off guard by the end of the game if you're still trying to complete your long ticket, so you should keep track of how many trains everybody has and how close they are to ending the game. Similarly, if you can tell that you have a strong lead and have already completed your major tickets, then you might want to try to drive the game to a conclusion as quickly as possible by playing on long routes that are disconnected from your other tickets. The other players might think you still have a ways to go since you still have 18 trains left, but if you quickly play 3 6-train routes 3 turns in a row, you can quickly end the game before the other players even really have a chance to react. So far in this video, we've been discussing the traditional or standard way of playing Ticket to Ride, which has an emphasis on earning points by completing tickets. However, there is another way to play, one that basically ignores tickets entirely. The basic strategy goes like this. At the beginning of the game, you only keep the 2 shortest tickets that you're dealt and try to complete those as quickly as possible to avoid losing points. You then focus all of your energy on completing long routes and trying to end the game as quickly as possible. Through this strategy, you can rack up a ton of points and end the game very quickly. You probably won't win the longest route bonus card, but most of your opponents will probably end up losing points because they didn't have time to complete all of their tickets. An even more extreme version of this strategy is to ignore the tickets entirely and focus only on collecting the long routes. Sure, you'll lose some points at the end of the game since you haven't completed all your tickets, but so will everybody else, and since you've maximized your points per train, you should come out on top. These strategies are most effective when everybody else at the table is focusing on the traditional strategy and trying to complete tickets in order to earn points. If you're the only one going for a quick kill while everybody else at the table is trying to complete long coast-to-coast routes, then this strategy can basically be a guaranteed win. Although it does become less effective if multiple people take this strategy and are competing for these 5 or 6 train routes. You might also be accused of not following the spirit of the game, but hey, a win's a win, right? And if winning wasn't important to you, you probably wouldn't have made it this far in the video. Well, that's all I have for this week. If you found this video useful, make sure to give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss more strategy guides in the future. If you have additional Ticket to Ride tips or suggestions for which game I should tackle next, let me know in the comments down below. And join me next time for a guide on homebrewing spells in Dungeons & Dragons. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.